Hello, and welcome to CoMotion Lab's Fundamentals for Startups. For those of you that are new to us, CoMotion Labs provides a multi-industry lab system hosting startups inside and outside the UW community. In life sciences, biotech and health tech, medical devices, robotic and hardware, software and IT, and fintech. Our startups range from pre-seed to Series A, employing 2 to 5 people each, and are variously headed by students, faculty, and community leaders, with both new and seasoned entrepreneurs represented. While we wait for everyone to log in to this meeting, we'll make a few announcements. Next week, Lisa Fernroe, president of Fernroe Consulting, will discuss startup marketing imperatives. All our fundamentals for startups presentations are archived on our CoMotion website under Labs Startup Training Videos. We cover a variety of topics over the past several years, so if you find yourself with some free time, check out our past talks. For our full schedule and to register for future fundamentals, please visit CoMotion at uw.edu/events. Also, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and click the little bell. You will then be notified of all our future live streams. Finally, Fundamentals for Startups is funded in part by a grant from the Economic Development Agency. We will be dropping a link into the chat to a short survey. Please tell us who you are, where you're watching, and how you heard about this event. This will be us report back to continue the funding. This year, we are proud to partner with Bluetooth to support the Fundamentals Startup Program. See how Bluetooth audio sharing is poised to once again change the way you experience audio and connect with the world around you.
Bluetooth introduced the world to wireless audio. Calling, listening, watching, making us safer, more productive, more joyful. It's part of the fabric of our lives. Now, Bluetooth will bring us even closer to each other and our world with audio sharing. It will let us share with others our music, our experiences, listening and watching together. The places we go will share with us, enriching our experiences, helping us hear our world. Breaking down barriers between interests, cultures, generations. Introducing Bluetooth audio sharing. Closer together.
Today, Isaac Kato is here to discuss the funding path, a framework for startups on how to evaluate your fundraising options. Isaac Kato is the managing director of Techstars Seattle Accelerator. Techstars is a global startup ecosystem that helps entrepreneurs succeed. Isaac is a serial entrepreneur, technology leader, and investor. Before Techstars, Mr. Kato served as president of Mighty AI, and a venture-backed company which was acquired by Uber. He has co-founded 2 companies, the first, Sven Technologies, and a 3D graphics software startup he co-founded, ran, and sold to a public CAD software company. From 2007 to 2017, he was co-founder and CFO of Verne Global, an Icelandic data center developer and operator, where he raised $200 million of equity and debt capital and led several functions. Today, Verne is one of the largest third-party data centers in the Nordic area. He has also spent a decade as a VC and growth equity investor. Most recently, with the General Catalyst Partners, he holds an MBA with distinction from Harvard Business School and an MS and BS from Stanford University. Isaac will take all questions via chat. Feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. I will now turn the event over to Isaac.
Okay, thanks, Ali. I appreciate the intro. Great to see you. I look forward to seeing you in person again, hopefully before too long. I want to wish everybody Happy New Year and good afternoon. And we really appreciate you taking your lunch hour to come and hear what I have to say. A few words about this week. Obviously, the events that transpired in our nation's capital on Wednesday are deeply, deeply disturbing. But while I think the fabric of American democracy was stretched, I'm really happy that it appears not to have broken, at least yet. And actually, I think there's a real tie here to startups. If you're in the startup game, which I know at least many of you who are listening to this are, you're fundamentally in the business of hope and optimism. And hope is a real sort of key ingredient to the resilience that any startup founder, team player needs to make it through the dark times that you inevitably face. And I hope that we are all maintaining our hope and that we use it as an inspiration to continue to fight the good fight and make sure that we not only preserve but advance the American experiment in which we are all living, because it's a cause that's well worth fighting for. So stay positive and stay hopeful. Okay, so as I said, my name is Isaac Kato. I'm the managing director of Techstars Seattle. As Alea said, I'm a serial entrepreneur. So I've started 2 companies. I've run 3. The first was a 3D graphics software company that I raised seed funding from people like Brad Feld, who many of you may know, who's with the Foundry Group. And that company was acquired by a public CAD software company a couple years after we started. My second company was Verne Global, which was a green Icelandic data center business that I actually started as an investor, but then I wound up joining full-time as one of the 3 executives that led that company for 10 years. While I was there, I raised $200 million of debt and equity through several stages. Today, Verne is one of the data center leaders in the Nordic arena. It's a growing, profitable company, and it was an incredible experience to do that. Most recently, as Alea said, I was recruited to be president of Mighty AI. Mighty AI is a Seattle machine learning startup that was backed by Foundry and Madrona and GV, among others, and we were acquired by Uber in 2019. And in addition to being a serial entrepreneur, I've been a professional investor now for, almost 25 years, I hate to say. And 10 of those years I was a professional venture capitalist. And then along the way, I've done a lot of angel investing. And in my role as managing director of Techstars, my job is, or a big part of my job is to help our companies raise capital. So of the 10 companies that went through the last cohort, I believe all of them raised some degree of angel money. And most of them raised a formal pre-seed or seed round from institutional investors. So I guess it's reasonable to say I have a decent amount of experience in terms of both raising capital as a founder, but also investing money. I should say a couple words about Techstars. I assume many of you, now most of you know what it is, but if you don't, we are one of the leading global venture accelerators. We have 47 venture accelerators worldwide. I run the Seattle program, which is the 3rd oldest, so we're entering our 12th year. It's unquestionably one of the most successful. We have at least 3 bona fide unicorns among our alumni, and collectively, Techstars Seattle alums have raised well over $1 billion of capital. I believe it's approaching $1.5 billion now. And notably, when I last checked, of the 110 companies that have gone through Techstars Seattle, about 75% of them had either exited or were still in business. So we really do contribute, I think, meaningfully to the success of our startup founders and their companies. So today I'm going to talk about some frameworks for how startups can think about funding themselves, and I'll do it by posing a series of questions and talking about some prospective answers to them. I'm gonna orient this more towards early stage founders or pre-founders who might be thinking about raising a pre-seed or seed round or finding that first slug of capital. I am happy to talk about later stage rounds, Series A, B, C's, and so on and so forth in the Q&A if people want to. Please do feel free to drop your questions either into the chat or into, into the chat. I'll try to keep up with them as I'm talking, but I'll also reserve time for a Q&A at the end. And I think, Alea, feel free to prompt me if you see anything that's particularly timely as it comes up. So let's jump in. Okay, let's jump in. Come on, slides. Here we go. So the first question is, why should I found a company? And you're probably saying, wait, I thought we were going to talk about fundraising. But I think actually the answer to the question, why should I found a company, is actually in many cases, at least, quite relevant to how you should think about funding your company, raising money for your company, because there are a lot of good reasons to start a company, and depending on what yours is, may very well shape what the optimal funding path looks like. So why should I fund a company? Well, one reason is, sorry, issues here with the slide. Okay, get rich quick. No, that's actually a terrible reason to start a company. I don't encourage you to start a company if that's what you want to do. There are many better paths to financial stability. Most startup companies don't actually succeed, and even if they do, you're not paying yourself for, meaningfully anyway for many years. There are better ways to make money. So actually, I don't actually think that's a great reason to start a company. Why else might I do it? Because I'm tired of being a corporate drone, lickspittle, and if I have to spend another minute sitting at this soulless, life-sucking workstation, I will dissolve into a puddle of gray goo. Okay, well, that may be a pretty compelling reason to get into the startup game. Certainly, you will get plenty of excitement, both good and bad, if you jump into startups. But at the same time, there are a lot of benefits to staying in a big company, and maybe you just need to find a big company that has a culture that's more suited to who you are. But nonetheless, if you want some excitement, okay, startups certainly provide that, no question. And then because I value autonomy and want to do things my own way. Okay, a lot of founders are in startups because of this, and I do think it's a very good reason to get into the startup game. You really, more so than in many careers, really have a lot of control of your own destiny. But, and this is one of those ones that relates to how you think about funding yourself, depending on how you do it, if you start to bring in, particularly if you go down the traditional venture route, most likely you will be relinquishing a good deal of control. And that is something you absolutely should be thinking about when you raise money, because over time you'll have a board of directors. The directors will represent investors who have special control provisions, and you will not entirely control your own destiny. So something to think about, and we'll talk more about that. And lastly, because I see a big unsolved problem or unmet need, and I know how to fix it or meet that need, and I won't sleep soundly until I do. That is a great reason to start a company. Number one, because you're doing something that you have a mission around, and I think typically mission-based companies are much more likely to succeed. And that opens you up to all kinds of fundraising paths, because you're fundamentally most concerned about delivering some great product to the market, which really changes the world, makes your customers' lives that much better. And that's a great reason to start a company. And again, also is a good reason to think about raising at least traditional venture capital. Okay. Whoops. So, what are some typical startup funding mistakes? Before you get going, what are the pitfalls that may await you? Well, first one is running out of cash. Okay. The number one reason why startup companies fail is they run out of money. And to be sure, raising enough money to keep things going one way or the other in the early stage of a company is always a paramount concern. And you need to make sure that you have secured a source of funding, whether it's from your customers or investors, to keep the lights on, to pay your employees, and to move things forward. But conversely, another startup funding mistake is raising too much money. And I know to many people who are out there struggling to raise money, that seems like an impossibility, but it does happen. Once you get a degree of traction, it's very easy to raise too much money. And I've seen plenty of companies ruin themselves, or at least make life much harder, because they raise too much money too soon. There are a lot of problems with that. You lose focus if you're not forced to think hard about how you allocate your capital. And I've seen plenty of companies, ruin their prospects by raising too much money. You can also start a fundraising process without adequate preparation. So I would guess that maybe a third, if not more, of the companies that wind up joining Techstars Seattle are there because they started a fundraising process and didn't really know what they were doing, fell flat on their faces, and realized, I might need some help in figuring this fundraising game. And they're super smart, super capable people, totally driven. It's just that there is a very much of an acquired and learned skill to raising capital, and there are a whole bunch of things that you need to do before you kick off a fundraising process that will dramatically increase your odds of success if you do that. So that's a mistake I see all the time. And related closely to that is half committing to a fundraise. So fundraising is something you have to do on an all-in basis. And a lot of people kind of put one foot in, put a toe in the pool, but they don't really commit to it. And I'm not saying you'll never raise money by kind of sort of testing the waters, but your odds are very low. Generally speaking, if you're going to try to raise money, you must go all in. And then lastly, raising the wrong capital or wrong type of capital at the wrong time. Again, we'll talk more about this, but you need to think hard about how much you're raising, what type of money you're raising, and as relates to what stage you are. There are lots of ways to trip up on this one. And then lastly, raising capital from the wrong investors. So one thing that I routinely counsel my founders on is to do their due diligence on their investors. When you go through a fundraising process, the investors are going to rake you through the coals. They're going to do deep due diligence, and you should be doing the same to them, because the reality is that it's probably easier to get divorced than it is to take a bad investor off of your cap table. And not enough founders really get to know who their prospective investors are. They don't do due diligence. They don't talk to people who these investors have backed before and find out how they work, particularly when things are tough. And look, sure, you may not have the option. Okay? There may only be one check writer at the table, and you may have to take that money. But if you've done it right, chances are you'll have a few options, and you should really do your due diligence on your investors to make sure you pick the right one for you. So what else do you need to know about fundraising? Well, first of all, it's really hard, especially if you haven't done it before. It is a tough process, and therefore it requires a lot of emotional and physical reserve. Okay? It's a roller coaster of a process. You'll feel like you have a great meeting, and then the next minute you'll be turned down, and you try as much as possible to reduce the amplitude of emotions that come with fundraising, or any sales process for that matter. But it really is quite draining, and it's going to be physically draining too. If you're taking a fundraising trip down to the Bay Area, once we can travel again, you're driving around from San Francisco down to Palo Alto and Menlo Park, somewhere in the Mid-Peninsula, and the traffic is horrible, and you're running around, and you're probably staying in a really lousy hotel or sleeping on someone's couch. And so you need to have the kind of reserves, both physically and emotionally, in place when you start to fundraise. And it usually takes a lot of time. I generally counsel people to budget at least 6 months to run a full-blown process. Certainly, it does occasionally happen where it goes really quickly and takes less time, but you have to expect that it'll take at least 6 months, and frankly, sometimes more. And it's often very, very frustrating. The process and the investors that you talk to tend to have a lot of opacity. And a lot of times it's really hard to read what's going on. Most investors aren't going to tell you what they're really thinking. So you'll think you had a great meeting, and then an hour later they'll turn you down and they will tell you why. Or maybe they will tell you why, and you'll say, wait a minute, but you didn't hear what I said, or you didn't get what I said. And that happens all the time. You missed my point. So you got to be prepared for frustration. It's also why you need to talk to a lot of people when you're raising capital. So you give yourself as many chances at that as possible, to use an American sports analogy. Okay, another thing you really need to know is that investors are not monolithic. So often people ask me, well, what do investors think about this or that? And my usual answer is, I don't know, because they're all different. For sure, there are investor platitudes and generalities that can apply to many investors, but they really are individuals, and they will all have their own points of view, their own ways of evaluating companies, their own hot buttons and priorities. And this is true even within a single firm. You'll have one partner who looks at a company one way and another partner who looks at it another way. And you can't assume that what's true for one investor will be true for all investors. You have to do your homework and really get to know them as individuals. But do not think of investors as this single monolithic group, because they're not. They're really great investors, they're really terrible investors, and there's everything in between. And then lastly, there are no guarantees. No matter how well you prepared you are, how much experience you have, there's no guarantee that you're going to succeed at fundraising. There's a stochastic, probabilistic element to it no matter what you do. But there are a lot of things you can do to dramatically increase your odds of success. As I said before, it's an acquired skill. There are a whole bunch of things that you need to do before a fundraise, like put together a well-researched pipeline of investors, have all your supporting materials like your deck, your financial model, your due diligence materials, your customer references in place. Ideally, you have set yourself up with a good head of steam and some real traction when you go into a fundraising. So there are a lot of things you can do to take those probabilities up, but there are certainly no guarantees. It is a tough game. Okay, so what should you ask yourself before you jump into the fray? Again, relating back to the very first point I made, have I really thought through my personal goals and needs for this company? Okay, and is the fundraising that I'm about to embark on aligned with what I really want? Okay, and related to that is the timing right? Certainly, is the timing right for me and my founding team and our company? Do we have everything lined up? Is it all ready to go? But also, there are a whole bunch of exogenous factors that can help or hurt a fundraising. In normal times, for example, fundraising in the summer is tough. Very hard to get on investors' calendars in July and August when many of them are on vacation. December can be really tough because usually people are very focused on closing investments that are already in their pipeline. Whereas in the spring, that's often a good time to go raise capital. Right after Labor Day is a good time to kick off a round. And then certainly there are questions of what is the market doing? What's the economic situation? So timing can really play a big impact in fundraising. And again, I've already said this, but are you fully committed? Am I ready to fully commit to the process? Have I cleared the decks? If you're the CEO and you're raising money, you should expect that you're going to spend 80% of your time fundraising when you do it. So have you set the rest of the team up to manage the business and keep it going? If you have children, is there childcare in place to make sure that you can fully commit and be focused on the fundraise? Okay. So am I mentally prepared to jump into this really tough exercise? Am I ready to have outside investors? Once again, am I ready to bring third parties, strangers, who chances are I don't really know very well, into my company? Okay, it's a big change once you bring in particularly institutional investors, and you need to be ready for it. And you need to talk to people who've done it before and ask them what are the pros and cons of it, because it's not for everybody. And related to that, am I ready to relinquish some degree of control of my company? Because I will very likely have to if I bring in professional investors, or for that matter, if I raise debt and have fixed obligations to pay, I'm going to be giving up control at some point, almost certainly. So I need to have the sort of mental preparation for that. And then what is the right quantum of capital for the company at our stage, and what is the right type of capital? And I'll talk about different types of capital later on in our talk. But those are all questions that you want to ask and have answers pretty clearly to before you jump into the fray. Now, for many, if not most people who are doing startups in CoMotion Labs, you're at least thinking pretty seriously about going down the traditional venture capital fundraising route. And so how do you know if your company is right for that funding path? Because again, there are many other paths, which I'll talk about later. But a lot of people, think that their company is right for venture capital, and they want to go and they want to raise a seed round, and then a Series A and a Series B. So how do you know if it's right for you? Well, the first question is, do you have a big enough market opportunity where you can pretty clearly build a $50 to $100 million recurring revenue business in the next 7 to 10 years? And this is often referred to as a venture scale company, if you don't know that phrase. Now, of course, you'll never know for sure, but you can oftentimes develop a pretty good sense of how big the market opportunity is and whether or not there's space to build a company of that size. Now, frankly, a lot of times, you just don't know, because let's say you're starting something in a brand new market, or you're creating the market, so you can only speculate. But at the very least, if you're going to go and raise institutional capital, people are going to want to be seeing that kind of outcome, and that is the path that you're going to put yourself on. So, you need to have a lot of conviction that you're going to be able to build a venture scale business. You want to know that either the target market that you're going after is big and rapidly growing, or will be big and continue to grow very rapidly, or you're attacking a market that's large and maybe stable, not growing that fast, but you have some disruptive approach that's going to allow you to steal market share really rapidly and again, build a big business. Again, if you go down the venture path, the thing that you have to do to succeed is grow very, very rapidly. And I would encourage you to sit down with a spreadsheet and look at the kind of compound growth rates that you need to have in order to get to a $50 or $100 million annual recurring revenue business. It's really dramatic. You will need to grow 2, 3, 4x, at least for a handful of years, year over year, to achieve that type of scale. So you're going to need to have a way to grow really rapidly. And there are a lot of really interesting startup opportunities that don't present that type of growth opportunity. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with them. It just means you need to fund your business correctly. And we'll talk more about that. You need to be sure that you can actually apply the capital that you raise intelligently and effectively. And there are absolutely periods of time in many companies where having more money does not mean that you're going to be able to go any faster. A lot of times you can get more done with 2 developers as opposed to 10. If you're still trying to figure out how to sell your product, the last thing you want to do is hire 10 salespeople. You want to be selling yourself and maybe have one SDR or one salesperson or account manager by your side helping you sell. But until you have a playbook and you know why the customer's buying your stuff, you'll just be flushing money down the toilet. So you want to know that you can actually use the money to intelligently drive growth, and not just kind of put it down into a leaky bucket. And then you want to ideally be sure that you're going to benefit from value-added investors. You typically want to, if you're going to raise institutional capital, raise it from people who are smart about your business and who can help you. And otherwise, you need to think carefully about that. And again, be willing to relinquish some degree, if not a lot of control. At some point, there's a good chance if you go down the venture path, you will not have control of your company anymore, and you can be fired or pushed out, and you have to be, comfortable with that. And then you have to be willing to relinquish what I call path flexibility. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, in the early days of your company, there are lots of ways you can go. You can bootstrap yourself. You can raise a little bit of capital. You can set yourself up where you might be acquired for a small amount of money and be really happy about that. But once you go down the venture route and you've raised your Series A or B, you have put yourself on a very, very fixed and somewhat binary path. You're effectively saying, okay, we're going to have to shoot the moon now. We are going to have to get to that $50 to $100 million annual revenue range for us collectively, the founders and the investors, to feel like this is a really truly successful outcome. And too often I see people put themselves on that route before they really know that they have a venture scale opportunity, and they lose that path flexibility, and they're pretty unhappy because, hey, we raised a whole bunch of money, we can fund ourselves for some number of years, but now the only thing that feels good is if we sell our company for $500 million to go public at $1 billion valuation. And so you want to think hard before you put yourself on that very fixed path. Okay. So bootstrapping, this is another, and I'm going to start to get into some of the alternatives to the venture path. But bootstrapping is something that everybody should be thinking about, especially at the early stages, because no matter what, whether you raise no capital or a lot of capital, the best dollars that come into your company come from your customers, because it shows that you have built something of value that customers are willing to pay, hopefully, good money for. And the bottom line is, even if you're raising external capital, you still have to get money from your customers at some point, and a lot of it, in order to make everybody happy and to drive a good outcome. So you should ask yourself, well, actually, am I putting the cart before the horse, in my case, by raising money before I get customer dollars? Maybe I can do such a good job with my customers and generate so much value that I don't need to raise external capital. I can get customers to prepay for products. I can get them to pay me upfront for a multi-year subscription, and I can bring a lot of money into my company without ever having to give up an ounce of equity to an outsider. And you know what? It really, really does happen. So I assume many people, if not most of you, have heard of or used Calendly. It's rapidly become one of the primary calendaring assistants that people use. I use it multiple times a day. I can't even think what life would be like without it at this point. And Calendly is rumored to be about a $75 million run rate company, which means that it's unquestionably, in unicorn territory, worth well over $1 billion. Does anybody know how much money they've raised? So I believe they started in 2013, and the grand sum total of external capital that they've raised is $550,000. Okay, that is, that if that's not evidence that you can bootstrap a really big company, I don't know what is. And of course, there are plenty of examples of companies that are $5, $10, $20 million that are bootstrapped, and I think that's a really good way to go, because frankly, some of the happiest people I know are the founders of $5, $10, $20 million software companies that are nicely profitable. They maybe drop $1 million or $2 to the bottom line. The founders take that home every year, and they have total control of their business. They do what they want to do. They manage their lives the way they want to live. And again, some of the bootstrap founders who succeeded are some of the happiest people I know. And frankly, a lot of times they make as much money as they would have if they'd gone the venture route anyway. They take home money. They effectively pay themselves dividends for their business in the middle years. And then they ultimately can still sell their company for a lot of money if that's what they're inclined to do. Or maybe they just say, you know what, I'm happy doing this forever because I really love the mission that I'm on. I love my company, and I don't need to sell it or go public. I'm just going to do this because it's fun. So that's something to think about. So I keep on alluding to all these other ways that you can raise capital that are not on the venture path. So let's go through them. I'm going to list 7 or 8, and I'm sure there are another 10 more. But for starters, many companies, whether you go down the venture path or not, wind up raising money from angels and or family and friends. This is often the easiest type of money to raise. It comes with the least amount of commitment, the least amount of dilution. You're not relinquishing any meaningful control. You obviously, particularly if you're raising from family and friends, need to be clear that this money is very likely not going to return just because it's in the startup game. You need to set clear expectations about the timeframes involved in startup success. I mean, Frankly, the more successful you are, the longer it takes. These days, the real big unicorns will often wait 10, if not 12 years or longer before they finally exit and go public. And you need to be really clear with your family and friends about what those timelines look like. And the same thing is true with angels. But that's a great way to get started. And you might find that, hey, all I'm going to do is raise $250,000 and then bootstrap from there. And that's a pretty nice outcome in a lot of cases. Certainly, many companies are suitable for debt or project financing, even at a potentially early stage. So particularly asset-intensive things can receive project financing. So for my data center business, which was very capital intensive, we were able to pre-sell big contracts to our enterprise customers, and on the back of that, use it to raise project financing to go and build the infrastructure to support those contracts. Similarly, sometimes debt is available at a pretty early stage. Now, you need to be very clear with yourself that this is money that you will have to pay back on a fixed schedule. So in terms of thinking about, is this the right type of capital for me, you need to be pretty confident that with that debt, you will have suitable future cash flows to pay it down, because there won't be the same sort of flexibility in terms of time frame that you get from an equity financing. But again, it's something to think about. And another type of debt-like instrument that may be available to you are factoring or revenue-based funding. So as soon as you are generating revenue, there are ways to essentially borrow against your incoming cash flows. There's a company here in town called Lighter Capital. And sorry, in town is in Seattle, by the way, called Lighter Capital, and they do revenue-based financing, I believe, for SaaS companies. So they look at your contracts and they say, okay, well, you've got this much revenue coming in. You'll set aside a piece of it for us to pay back the loan that we're going to make you. But it's a nice way to think about raising money. Factoring is a closely related type of financing that way. We've already talked about bootstrapping and customers, but again, there are a lot of times when you can get customers to pay you in advance or pay you cash upfront for a multi-year contract, and I think those are the best dollars, no matter what you do. It's certainly worth it for many companies to look into government grants and SBIRs. And there are companies in the last many Techstars companies that go down this route, particularly in this COVID era. But you'd be surprised at the nature of government grants and SBIRs that are available. A lot of times people think that SBIRs are for defense companies, and they're really not only. We have an Air Force Accelerator within Techstars, and what I've learned is the Air Force buys a whole bunch of stuff. It's not just airplanes and radar systems and missiles. They have to buy procurement software. They have to buy a whole bunch of technology that may not feel sort of as like a defense research grant, but that they need to run their business. And so it's well worth looking at these. There's certainly an art to writing these grants and winning these grants that you need to get smart on, but there are plenty of resources to do that. And that is almost always non-dilutive financing. So something to think about. Big companies have been built just on SBIRs. Pitch competitions. Okay, so this is not going to be big money necessarily, but especially in your earliest of days when you don't have a big burn rate, it's well worth thinking about doing some pitch competitions. There was a company in the last cohort, New, that they got into Techstars on their third try. So in the years before that, they made their money with a little bit of angel money. They funded themselves a little bit of angel money. They bootstrapped significantly, and they actually got a decent amount of money from pitch competitions. So if you've got a really good pitch, you might be able to drum up, $25,000 here or there via pitch competitions. Equity and non-equity crowdfunding are also options to think about outside of the traditional venture path. So on the non-equity side, these are things like Kickstarter. On the equity side, many of you will know Republic. And again, there's an art to doing this well. I tend to think of Kickstarter as a great thing if you have a really clear, tangible product in mind. Certainly competitive, like all of these are, but it is definitely an option to consider. and ICOs. So many of you may have heard of initial coin offerings. These are way out of vogue right now. But 3 years ago, these were the hottest thing. And all sorts of crypto and Bitcoin and blockchain related companies were raising tons of money on ICOs. They're kind of like the SPAC of 2000, this would have been 2016, 17, 2015 era. And there are some of it was pretty, frankly, shady, or a lot of it was shady and slimy, but there are also some legitimate reasons for a token-based ICO. And it wouldn't entirely surprise me if they come back or something like them reemerges, because there are some really good reasons to do that kind of thing. And then consulting and services. So this is essentially a form of bootstrapping, but while you're developing your product, you could think about selling consulting or services in a closely related field. Take the learning that you get from doing that and apply it to your product development. It's important to be really careful about making sure that you own your IP versus your consulting customers. But it's a nice way to kind of pay yourself a salary, keep the lights on as you build your product by doing it that way. Now, it's very tough when you decide to really go for it and launch your product and make that your primary business, because you'll be pretty hooked on that consulting revenue. And that is a tough sort of genetic transition that companies will often stumble on. But this is another way to go without raising significant amounts of outside capital. I would be remiss if I did not mention accelerators and incubators like Techstars. Techstars is an accelerator. When you come in, we make up to $120,000 investment, but far more importantly, over the course of the 13 weeks in your program, we teach you a lot about how to become a really good fundraiser, help you get prepared for a fundraise, and then we introduce you to dozens, if not hundreds, of investors. And particularly if you're not a good networker or you don't have a robust network of prospective investors, it's a path to consider. Not every accelerator is equal. Some of them don't take any equity. Some of them are not like sort of this intense 13-week experience that we offer at Techstars. So but there's an accelerator for every industry and every sort of setup. So it's certainly something to think about. So I'm coming to the end of my nonstop rambling, but I'll leave you with some parting advice for aspiring fundraisers. The first is, it's really hard, okay? I said this before. If you haven't done it before, it's really, really hard. And even if you have done it before, it's hard. So get ready to dig deep into those emotional and physical reserves and be prepared for a hard slog. It's a means to an end, not an end. Okay, this is super, super important, and I haven't really talked about it. I've often seen founders expressing triumph and victory after they close their seed round or their Series A round or their Series B round. And of course, they should be extremely happy and very proud. It's a really major accomplishment. It's a critical milestone on the path to success, but it is only that. It's a milestone, and it's a means to fund your ability to get to the next set of goals and milestones. But it does not mean that you've won. Winning means that you've won a lot of customers, you're generating a lot of profitable revenue, and you have a really great product or service that people can't live without or really, really love. And the money is just an enabling tool and a means to get to that end, but it's not an end in itself. And you shouldn't forget that. So therefore, start with an end in mind and seek appropriate funding accordingly. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is, as much as possible, pull out your crystal ball and think about the outcome that you are trying to drive to. And again, what do you really want personally to get from your business? And then put your fundraising plan together accordingly. Too many people just say, "Oh, I need money to get my company going, but I don't really know what the end goal should look like, or at least what I want it to look like." And before you know it, they either failed, or they've raised the wrong type of money, or the wrong amount of money, or from the wrong people. So really try to think through the plan strategically and start with that end in mind. Build your skills and get in the reps. As I said before, this is an acquired art and skill set. You can train yourself to be a much, much better fundraiser. Okay, and the good news is there's tons of free information out there about how to do it. There are books, there are podcasts, there are blog posts. There's an incredible network of people around CoMotion who have done this, and you need to talk to a lot of them and find out what they did right. And then you need to get a lot of practice in. Practice your pitch. Practice, do mock VC interviews. Ask people to really poke holes in your business plan and have well-prepared answers. There's no startup that does not have, or I should say, every startup has, significant weaknesses and problems, and you need to be prepared to address those with investors. So, get the skills, get the reps in, and you'll dramatically increase your odds of success. As I've said before, if you're going to raise external capital, commit to the process and go all in. Don't do it on a half-baked basis. Wait till you're ready to go all in if you need to, but if you put just one toe in the water, your odds of success are pretty minimal. So that's all for me. For now, I'm happy to take questions. Alea, I see you're back on the screen. Yes. I don't see any in the Zoom chat, so I'm assuming you're getting them over or YouTube, or maybe we have no questions.
Yes, from YouTube, actually, we have Alexander N. In biotech, 7 to 10 years is a common clinical trial length. Does that mean biotech isn't compatible with the venture path until you've started clinical trials, since you'll be starting sales in 10 years?
Okay, no. Now, let me first of all say I am absolutely not a biotech investing guru whatsoever. I don't actually touch it. It's a dark art to me. But there's even in that industry, there's a very clear kind of conventional equivalent to the venture path for an IT-oriented tech startup. And frankly, those companies can often go public long before they have a product on the market. So they will often raise significant amounts of venture before they've gone into any clinical phases. And then they'll raise maybe another big round when they go into phase 1. And then you'll see a lot of companies that go public, I believe, right around phase 2, even before they get to phase 3, or they get snapped up by a big pharma company. So there is a very sort of specialized path for biotech and pharma related companies. But nonetheless, it's still kind of the same thing. I don't know much about sort of the bootstrapping of those companies, but I do know that there are companies that can absolutely get grants. I know that oftentimes there will be co-development deals with big pharma that can help to finance the efforts in that industry. But that's one where I would really go and talk to someone who's a significant biotech investor, because it's a very sort of niche skill.
Thank you.
Good question.
Awesome. We have a question from Shane. How do you balance raising enough money to survive unexpected setbacks without raising too much money?
Right. Great question. I should have talked about this during the main presentation. So how do you know how much money to raise? Well, there's always going to be some degree of guessing, but the framework that I encourage Techstars founders to think about is you want to raise enough money that will comfortably let you hit the milestones that you think you need to hit in order to secure the next financing event. Now, the next financing event might be after a seed round, the Series A. It might be profitability. Okay, but the point is, you have to be thinking about, okay, what do I need to do to achieve the next securing the next glob of capital, wherever it may come from. And it might be milestones around product, around revenue, around team building, around growth. But you should know what those are. You should calculate how much money you need to raise, to invest in your product development teams, to invest in your go-to-market efforts, and then give yourself a little bit of cushion, because you're always going to get it wrong. You'll need a little bit more time to do that. Typically, you want to have at least an 18-month runway, if not 24 months, with what you raise, especially if you're going down the venture path. It really sucks to raise only enough money to go for 6 months, let's say, and then you're back to fundraising again, which takes a lot of time and it's distracting you from running your business. So you want to raise enough to have a good at least 18 to 24 months, if at all possible, but as importantly, tie it to the milestones that you need to achieve. and then give yourself a little bit of a cushion. But let's say you happen to be one of those fortunate people who is having money thrown at you. Don't raise 2 or 3x what you need right now, okay? Because you're only going to dilute yourself. And again, all kinds of problems come with companies that raise too much, way more money than they need in a lot of cases. Good question.
All right. From Bill, under what conditions does a licensed broker dealer need to be a part of the process in order to be compliant with the feds? And what role would these people play in the process?
Goodness. That's another hard question. I am not a securities expert. I am not a licensed broker dealer. I know you have to pass up at your Series 7. You have to get approved, and there are brokers or bankers who absolutely help in this process. And I would talk to them about what you need to do. So if you're raising capital on behalf of someone, then you do need to achieve compliance. I don't raise capital on people's behalf. I help them with guidance and advisorship, but I'm not taking a transaction fee when I help the Techstars founders raise money. And we're very careful, for example, when they do demo days, they're not actually publicly raising money. So anyway, I would talk to someone who was a licensed broker dealer, but you certainly have to go for certification. If you are in the business of raising capital for a company on a third-party basis, and you are talking to both qualified and unqualified investors, you do need to have that registration.
All right. So from Seth, we are currently a hardware-based company lot. My question is regarding applying Techstars.
Mm-hmm.
What are the specific factors you are looking for in such an early stage startup?
Yes, you should absolutely apply to Techstars. We take all types of companies. I guess I should talk a little bit about Techstars. I'm not doing my job in terms of marketing my own company here, but so there are 2 main types of accelerators within Techstars. We have our city-based ones, like the one that I run for Seattle, which is industry agnostic. So we're open to pretty much any type of tech-oriented industry. And then there are corporate-sponsored, vertically specific accelerators who tend to concentrate in an industry type. So, for example, we have a healthcare accelerator. We tend to have we have a couple. We have an Air Force one. We have a space one. There are a whole bunch of there's some social impact ones. So there are a whole bunch of sort of industry-specific accelerators, and you need to figure out which one's best for you. I encourage people to apply early and often to Techstars. So the biggest group of companies that gets into Techstars are companies that have applied before. And there's no stigma or problem with applying, not getting in, and then applying again. I see it all the time. Companies that apply to my program get into another program. I take companies that didn't get into another program the first time around. I took a company that applied to Seattle and took them on their 3rd time. So you should apply early, apply often. I would get to know the MDs of the program that you're interested in. One thing about this year, while we're in lockdown and dealing with COVID, is that every Techstars accelerator is running virtually right now. So normally we would expect you to show up and spend 13 weeks in person with us. Right now, you can apply to any Techstars program in the world as long as you're willing to operate on their time zone. There are for hardware companies, there are some MDs that have more experience and better networks for hardware companies. Boston is a really good one. They've done a lot of hardware, but pretty much every city program has taken hardware companies at some point. So apply early, apply often, and most of us are very approachable. I would strongly encourage you to just get on our calendars, particularly when we're in the recruiting phase. So Techstars Seattle's, we're starting our next program in just a couple of weeks, but and I'll be super busy from late January through late April, but I still usually block an hour to time every week to talk to new companies, or I'll ask you to wait until May, but then I'm more than happy to talk to you. Our application's open in July, and run through October, and we make our decision late at the end of 2021. But there are 6 windows for Techstars that you can apply to throughout the year. So you can pretty much apply every 2 months. So get to know the MDs, figure out what they're interested in, and that's a good place to start. Thanks.
All right. From Kai, what is the current appetite for safes in Seattle?
It's very commonly used. I would, whether it's a safe or a convertible note, I want to say at least half of the companies in the last Seattle class raised money on a safe before, during, or after the program. Most early stage investors who do pre-seed and seed investing are comfortable with a safe. They may ask for some additional investor rights around information, and it's still fundamentally a convertible note at its essence. So, but it's very common.
Okay. And then last question I have is from Harrington. How important is to have a working prototype when raising money? Does it make sense to invest a decent amount of time into it instead of mocking the concept?
Good question. So the way I'll answer it is this. Most early stage investors look at a handful of things. They're going to look at the team, and they'll want to know that you are the right team to be going after this problem. They look for things like founder market fit. Do you really understand the problem you're trying to solve? Do you have, the right temperament and skills to do a startup? Have you done it before? Do you have any relevant experience? A whole bunch of things go into evaluating the team. They'll look at the market opportunity. Are you going after a big opportunity? And then they look at the idea and traction. And after sort of team and opportunity, traction is almost always the single biggest factor that determines, the success of a fundraise. The more traction you have, the more likely you are to succeed in raising capital. So the further along you can be, the easier it's going to be to raise your money. And why? Because what it does is it answers questions. Okay. So if you come to me and say, hey, I want to raise $100,000 to go build this widget, and I say, well, that's great. Okay, well, it looks like you have widget building skills, but I don't know if you haven't been in a startup before. I don't know if you can do that in this sort of cash constrained environment. Okay, well, it's much better if you say, hi, I want to raise some money, and I built this prototype of the widget. See, I can actually build it, and it works. By the way, it's always better to have more traction, more evidence of success when you go out to raise money. Now, you don't always have the luxury of doing that, but at Techstars, we spend a lot of time encouraging, and helping companies to build traction before they go out to raise capital, because their job is so much easier than if they're going out with just a team and a concept. It does happen. You see people raise lots of money with, 2 founders and a piece of paper and a concept, but that's pretty unusual, and it usually only happens if they're serial successful entrepreneurs who've done it before and have worked together for 10 years and really know the space they're going after. So the more traction you have, the better. And so yes, if you have the funds to build that prototype, do it before you go and you try to raise money. It'll be that much easier. Okay.
Okay, I think that was the last question.
Okay.
Thank you, Isaac.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. I just want to say thank you so much to you and Caroline, and thanks Rick for helping out, and great to see you. And I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak to your community. It was super fun.
All right. And then as a reminder, next Friday at noon, we'll be hearing from Lisa Fernroe, president of Fernroe Consulting, who will discuss startup marketing imperatives. Sign up for that, and we'll see you next week. Thanks.